This is a gentle and refined old man, yet he also has a wild side. He has chased away black bears, hunted elk, and catching small animals is certainly no problem for him. Although his hair is white, he is only in his 70s, which is still a prime age for hard work. The Yaak River Valley in Montana has already put on its winter clothes early. It is only October, but the valley is already shrouded in a biting chill. Tom went out for a trip for a few days, and on his way back, he unexpectedly picked up a high-quality pelt, which was a good start to the season. But when he excitedly arrived at the shed, the sight before him instantly left him stunned. The window glass was shattered, the door was violently pushed open, and the inside was a complete mess. This terrible scene caused Tom's blood pressure to soar. He judged that this must be the work of a bear. Sure enough, he found a tuft of black hair on the window frame. It seemed this was a black bear. Tom took inventory of the losses inside the shed, which broke his heart. These were all valuable assets. As he checked the items, he noticed an unprocessed deer hide on the floor, which still had some fat left on it. It seemed that this scent had attracted the hungry black bear. With the approach of the bitter winter, black bears become bolder and more aggressive in order to store energy for hibernation. It would likely come back. The most urgent task right now was to repair the broken window, as the cold wind was constantly blowing in. The shed was full of important materials, and he couldn't let them suffer further damage. Tom temporarily blocked the gap with a plastic sheet, waiting to replace it after buying glass. Then he began to clean up the mess on the floor, cursing the hateful black bear as he worked. After clearing the debris, he had to process the deer hide covered with meat scraps. Otherwise, the strong smell of raw meat would attract predators from miles around. Tom skillfully wielded a boning knife, cleanly and efficiently scraping the remaining meat scraps off the hide. In a short time, he finished processing the deer hide and prepared to take the scraps into the woods to throw them far away. Who would have thought that just as he approached the woods, he would come face to face with that black bear? This guy wanted to come back for a buffet. Seeing his enemy made him see red, Tom furiously threw down the iron bucket, grabbed his shotgun, and charged over. The black bear, having never seen such a scene, was scared out of its wits by the fierce old hunter and turned to flee into the woods. Tom's angry roars continuously echoed behind it. He only regretted that he ran too slowly. Watching the fleeing black bear in a panic, Tom didn't fire. He had killed many wild beasts in his life, but as he grew older, his aggressive energy had also restrained a lot, so he wanted to give the black bear a chance. But if this furry thief dared to rebel again, what awaited him would surely be a cold bullet. Although he drove the black bear away, it might still return, so Tom needed to take some defensive measures. He nailed a sturdy piece of plywood over the window, planning to replace it with glass only after the bears went into hibernation. However, Tom's biggest worry was the door, because the black bear had already memorized the entrance and would very likely push the door straight open next time. So he found a thick wooden bolt and firmly secured it to the door, but this was not enough. Tom dug out a thick wooden plank, densely hammered sharp iron nails into it, and placed it at the doorway. If that bear dared to come again, stepping on this would definitely be enough to make it suffer. To be safe, he made another nail board in the same way and placed it under the window. Having finished these defensive measures, Tom finally breathed a sigh of relief. He could sleep peacefully tonight. A few days later, his wife Nancy returned from out of town but brought bad news. Fresh bear paw prints appeared in the snow. It seemed this bear didn't learn its lesson. It had wandered around the yard several times last night, targeting the pigeon coop, and finally sneaked over to the tool shed. Fortunately, it was stopped by the nail board at the door. Tom shook his head in anger. He had kindly let it off the hook, yet this beast actually dared to come back. But right now, he had no time to fuss with a bear. He still had a pile of deer hides waiting to be processed. The schedule was delayed, and he had to catch up as soon as possible. But just as he was preparing to work, he found that his scraper was missing. This tool was made of deer antler, and it was likely stolen by that black bear because it carried the scent of a deer. As things stood, he could only make a new one. Tom found a thick deer antler, marked the dimensions, and cut it with a saw. Although the antler was incredibly hard, it was quickly cut into the appropriate shape under the sharp saw teeth. Then he used hemp rope to firmly bind the blade to the antler, and a brand new scraper was finished. Next, it was time to process the deer hide. Tom placed the frame between two trees and used the scraper to slowly remove the hair and remaining fat. This scraper was surprisingly effective, bringing down a large patch of hair with every stroke. He also stopped from time to time to sharpen the blade. Only by keeping it sharp could he properly scrape the animal hide, especially in vulnerable areas like the armpits and abdomen. which must be handled with extra care. A perfect deer hide can fetch a high price of $800. The next step in tanning is to prepare a magical potion. Tom placed fresh animal brains into water to heat them together, finally stirring them into a milky white liquid. This is an ancient technique. The oils in the brain can soften the skin. As Tom applied the mixture to the leather, he marveled at the wisdom of the ancients, wondering who came up with this highly practical method. After applying a few coats, he just had to wait for it to dry naturally. The winter in the Yak River Valley was still a few days away from officially starting. The weather, which should have been bitterly cold, suddenly welcomed an unseasonable warm current. This not only disrupted the animal's life rhythms but also affected Tom's work. He went out to check his traps. Along a 10-mile trap line, Tom had set many traps, with pine martens being one of the main targets. A marten pelt could bring in an income of $100. However, the traps were completely empty. Pine martens move their locations according to weather changes, and the current abnormal weather made their whereabouts unpredictable. Worse still, there were clearly several strings of grizzly bear footprints in the snow. They were supposed to be hibernating, but they were actually still wandering outside, and the direction they were heading surprisingly pointed straight at his traps. Tom had an ominous premonition. He quickly arrived at the trap site, and sure enough, it had been destroyed, and the bait in the box was gone. Tom was both angry and helpless. He moved on to the next trap, which had also been attacked. Grizzly bears have good memories. Having tasted sweetness here, it would definitely come back to check in every day. It seemed that until the grizzly went into hibernation, the marten trapping plan was completely ruined. Now, he could only activate his backup plan, which was to trap beavers. These aquatic rodents not only have more valuable fur but also wouldn't attract the grizzly bear's attention. Tom dipped the traps into a special solution to wash them. This liquid, made from rotting tree bark and diesel fuel, could not only lubricate the mechanism but also mask the human scent. Next, Tom brought out his treasured bait. Beavers have a gland in their stomachs, which they excrete onto the ground to mark their territory. Tom would use this characteristic by sprinkling the gland powder near the trap. The highly territorial beaver would think there was an intruder and would eagerly rush over to claim dominance. However, what awaited it would be a deadly trap. After getting everything ready, Tom drove to his destination, a narrow tributary of the Yak River. Tom was looking for the best placement spot. The shallows upstream were suitable for setting leg traps. He carefully secured the device to a cross log, adjusting it just enough for the water current to wash over the mechanism. When a beaver swam upstream, it would accidentally trigger the trap. After setting this trap, Tom continued moving downstream. The water here was deeper, suitable for another type of submerged trap. He drove an iron rod into the ground and tied a cable to it, with the other end connected to the trap. To lure the beaver, Tom prepared a homemade sauce, the main ingredient of which was beaver gland. It had a pungent smell that could attract a beaver's attention from afar. Tom set a total of 4 traps before going home to wait. Early the next morning, Tom eagerly returned to the riverbank to check the traps he had set the previous day. Unfortunately, the first 2 were completely empty. Although the third trap had been triggered, the cunning beaver had successfully escaped. Tom walked toward the last trap, silently praying in his heart. However, no miracle happened. There was no harvest here either. A feeling of disappointment surged in his heart. This year's start was very rough. First, a black bear ransacked his shed, then a grizzly bear ate the bait for his marten traps, and now, he couldn't even catch a beaver. It could be called the hardest start Tom had ever experienced. He had to find a way to turn the situation around, so he decided to head deep into the wilderness 30 miles away, to an untouched, pristine lake where few people ever set foot. Perhaps that place could bring new opportunities. This was also Tom's first time going there, and the mountain roads were covered in snow, making the journey full of uncontrollable factors. After driving for a distance, the road ahead became impassable, so Tom had to drag his sled and proceed on foot. The thick snow made it very difficult to walk, and it took a lot of effort before he finally reached his destination. Looking around, he found an ice hole with flowing river water inside and fresh beaver footprints nearby, indicating this was an entrance and exit hole for beavers. Tom decided to set a trap here. He quickly cleared the snow around the hole and swung his axe to chop hard at the ice. After a dozen strikes, he opened a hole large enough to place the trap. Because beavers love to eat tree bark, Tom specifically selected a young aspen tree so the beaver could have a full meal before hitting the road. He secured the bait and the trap to a wooden frame, carefully lowered it into the ice hole, and then covered the hole with pine branches. This would both confuse the beaver and prevent the hole from freezing over at night. After setting 3 traps, it was getting dark, and Tom dragged his exhausted body back to where he parked. However, the truck chose this moment to break down. He lifted the hood, tightened a loose bolt, and tried the ignition again. This time the engine finally roared to life. Tom let out a long sigh of relief and hurried to drive back, aiming to get home before dark. The next day, Tom returned to the lake, his heart filled with both anticipation and anxiety. He had caught absolutely nothing so far this season, but maybe today would bring a turning point. Tom broke the thin ice over the first trap and slowly pulled up the wooden frame. Unfortunately, it was empty inside. With a slight sense of disappointment, he continued to check the next trap, which was the one he had the highest process. Although this catch was delightful, to make up for this year's losses, Tom still had to keep working hard. However, snowflakes falling from the sky brought some unfavorable factors to the trip. After searching for a while, Tom finally found elk tracks. Judging by his experience, this was an elk herd with 20 members that had passed through here about an hour for a better opportunity. Just as he moved forward, a head suddenly popped up over the summit. Tom hurriedly observed with his binoculars. It was indeed an adult elk. He re-entered his aiming stance, and the elk cooperated perfectly, exposing more than half of its body. Tom decisively seized the moment. A gunshot instant his tension was released. After calming down, he walked up to the elk and gently patted its body, thanking it for its sacrifice. Killing the elk wasn't the old hunter's original intent. Everything was just for survival. This was a 500-pound elk, killed with a single shot by the old hunter. Worried that the smell of blood would attract terrifying predators, Tom immediately began the butchering process. First, he cut open the elk's belly to remove the high-calorie internal organs. Otherwise, bacteria would breed, which would, in turn, affect the quality of the venison. Next, Tom cut the hide along the fat lines. On an elk, aside from the meat, the most valuable parts are the hide and the ivory canines. While the ivory is made into crafts and can sell for a high price of $300, Tom naturally wouldn't let them go to waste. Once the butchering was complete, he brought his horse over, tied the elk meat onto it, and braving the falling snowflakes, embarked on the journey home. Having solved his worries about the winter food supply, Tom needed to focus his energy on his main job. It just so happened that the Yak River Valley welcomed a heavy snowfall, which was the perfect time for trapping. Plus, with the arrival of the bitter winter, the grizzly bear that had previously stolen his bait must have gone into hibernation. This time, Tom set his sights on the Purcell Mountains. The rugged terrain there nourished abundant wildlife, making it an excellent place for trapping. The thick snow made advancing extremely difficult. While passing a steep slope, the snowmobile got deeply stuck in a snowbank. Tom spent a lot of effort to adjust the snowmobile's position. After restarting the vehicle, he accelerated from the bottom, using the momentum to rush up in one vigorous effort, and then drove all the way to the top of the mountain. Here, he saw the active signs of pine martens, which was an ideal spot to set traps. So, he nimbly chopped down a small tree and leaned it against another tree. Then he took out a trap box and secured it to the leaning pole, used a piece of smelly beaver meat as bait, and finally set the trap at the entrance. To increase the allure, Tom also unleashed a killer move, smearing a special liquid on a piece of deer hide, which would emit an enticing aroma. But that wasn't all. Tom used a lighter to ignite the deer hide, allowing the smell of burnt hair to drift with the wind. With 3 layers of temptation progressing one after another, he believed no pine marten could resist such a gastronomic lure. Tom hurried to the next location without stopping. His plan was to set 12 traps within an 8-mile radius. The short winter daylight was fleeting, but through Tom's continuous efforts, he finally completed this task before dark. Early the next morning, full of expectations, Tom set out to check the traps. However, reality dealt him a heavy blow. The first 3 traps yielded nothing. This caused his heart to gradually sink. The effort did not match the reward. Indeed, trapping was unpredictable. But the frustrated Tom immediately broke into a smile, because the next trap had finally caught a sleek and glossy pine marten. This was not only the first catch of the year, but also the turning point that broke his bad luck. Sure enough, good news came from the subsequent traps. Looking at the 2 hard-won catches, the joy of sweetness after suffering brought a gratified smile to Tom's face. His business was finally on the right track. So he wanted to expand the scale, setting a few more traps in certain nearby places. He believed that with the addition of these traps, he could reverse the losing situation of this season. After returning home, Tom received an order. A hunter was willing to pay a high price to hire him to tan a deer hide, planning to hang it on his wall. But his requirement was somewhat special. He wanted the hide tanned with the fur still intact. Although this job was very challenging, it could bring double the income. Tom carefully inspected this deer hide, but his brows unconsciously furrowed. It turned out that some mold spots had already appeared on the skin's surface. A slight misstep would lead to hair loss. He picked up his scraper and, with incredibly gentle movements, cleaned the skin surface bit by bit. Fortunately, what he worried about didn't happen, and he successfully completed this step. Next was the skin softening process. Tom evenly applied a mixture boiled from animal brains to every inch of the deer hide's surface. This ancient tanning recipe could make the stiff animal hide as soft as silk. After the potion fully penetrated, Tom began the stretching phase. He had all kinds of stretching tools, each with slightly different uses. Through this method, the fibers of the animal hide could be kept in a stretched state. After some time, the hide was completely dry. Tom took out a small knife and trimmed the edges of the hide neatly. He was a perfectionist, and the things he made had to be exquisitely crafted. The final step of tanning was using high heat to smoke it. He called his wife Nancy over to help. The two of them sewed the deer hide inside a cloth bag, which both protected the fur and ensured the smoke could penetrate evenly. Subsequently, Tom went outside to light a fire in the stove. When thick smoke was produced, he hung the wrapped deer hide directly above the stove and then tied the cloth bag to the chimney to ensure every part was evenly heated. A few hours later, Tom checked the results. The originally grayish-white skin surface had turned an elegant pale yellow, looking quite nice. So Tom took it inside, laid it flat on the table, and inspected it carefully. The smoking effect was surprisingly good. Tom contentedly stroked the soft fur. Every step embodied his craftsmanship. Now, he would take the hide to that hunter and exchange it for his hard-earned reward.